You try to breathe normally. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're just tired, that tomorrow will be easier. But something doesn't leave. It hums beneath your skin, coils in your chest, waits behind every silence. Not loud enough to scream, but impossible to ignore. People tell you you're anxious like it's a malfunction, a psychological glitch to fix. But what if it isn't? What if what you feel isn't a flaw, but a flicker? A signal that you're no longer asleep to the world around you. That beneath the roles, routines, and distractions, something inside you has begun to stir. Alan Watts once said that the desire for security and the experience of insecurity are the same thing. That paradox isn't meant to confuse you, it's meant to wake you up. What if anxiety isn't the problem, but the call to attention you've always tried to silence? This is not about finding techniques to calm you down. This is about finding the truth of what you've been ignoring. The truth that your anxiety may be the part of you that refuses to live unconsciously one more day. You're not anxious. You're aware. And that awareness has consequences. It doesn't take a tragedy to feel unsettled. Even when life looks fine on the outside, something within you trembles. You meet deadlines. You show up on time. You smile when expected. Yet beneath the surface, there is a tension you can't name. It tightens your jaw, interrupts your sleep, and lingers long after the noise of the day has faded. Most people call this anxiety. But what if it's not a malfunction? What if it's an honest signal from a part of yourself that refuses to be numbed any longer? We've been taught to measure well-being by performance, by composure, by the ability to function. But functioning is not the same as thriving, and composure is often a mask, not a measure of peace. We've mistaken the absence of breakdowns for true balance, and in doing so, we've buried our unrest beneath achievements and distractions. In a culture that rewards efficiency and emotional control, signs of internal resistance are labeled as dysfunction. The aching in your chest during a meeting, the impulse to cancel plans without explanation, the sudden weight in your limbs as the sun sets, all are dismissed as inconvenient symptoms to fix. We are expected to medicate, to meditate, to motivate ourselves into compliance. But beneath that resistance is something far more meaningful. Awareness, not just mental awareness, but somatic truth. The kind of knowledge that bypasses thought and speaks through the body. Your nervous system isn't betraying you, it is alerting you to the life you've outgrown, to the version of yourself you're pretending to be, to the rhythms of existence that no longer resonate with your internal pace. When Alan Watts spoke about the conflict between the desire for security and the experience of insecurity, he wasn't discussing clinical anxiety. He was speaking to the very foundation of our modern discontent. The more you strive for permanence, the more unsettled you become. Because permanence at its core is unnatural. And somewhere in you, you already know this. The illusion of calm is seductive. It keeps things moving. It convinces those around you that you're okay. But it comes at a price. That price is disconnection. You lose contact with your instincts, your creative impulses, your capacity to feel deeply and fully. So what we often label as anxiety may actually be a reawakening, a rebellion against deadness, a refusal to keep walking in shoes that don't fit. The discomfort that arises is not the enemy. It's the friction of returning to yourself. The illusion of calm asks you to settle for a life that doesn't nourish you. The truth calls you to wake up, no matter the cost. People often believe they fear failure, judgment, or even death. But beneath these fears lies a deeper terror, the fear of being seen as you are, without pretense or protection. This is the root that anxiety often wraps itself around. It is not just fear of external events, but fear of internal exposure, of standing in front of your own reflection without the armor of productivity, charm, or status. We learn early to build lives around expectations, to act in ways that are deemed acceptable, to filter our words, adjust our posture, soften our opinions. We survive by fitting in. But in that survival strategy, we lose something vital: the permission to be as we are. So when you feel anxious about a meeting, it may not be the agenda that disturbs you. It may be the pressure to maintain a version of yourself that no longer feels authentic. When you dread a family gathering, it might not be your relatives you fear, but the performative self you must resurrect to endure it. Anxiety often arises when your outer life begins to diverge from your inner world, when your values are in conflict with your actions, when your schedule is full but your soul is malnourished. Alan Watts spoke about the absurdity of trying to plan life in a universe that resists predictability. But more than that, he pointed to a kind of spiritual dishonesty, a tendency to cling to false identities rather than risk the vulnerability of living from the center. What you're really afraid of is not that things will go wrong. It's that you will be revealed, that the scaffolding of who you're supposed to be will fall apart, and underneath it, there will be nothing left. But this too is a lie, because what remains when the masks fall is not emptiness. It is the beginning of clarity. It is the start of a different kind of life, one that isn't scripted by fear or sustained by performance. The fear you feel is not a flaw. It is a compass. It is the body's way of saying something is off, something needs to change, something is waiting to be reclaimed. When you stop trying to silence this fear and instead listen to what it reveals, you begin to move in a different direction. Not toward perfection, but toward truth. The mind you carry inside you was not built for constant stimulation. It evolved to survive in landscapes shaped by nature, where danger was rare but real, where stillness was part of the rhythm, and where the body's signals aligned with the environment. Today, that environment is gone. In its place is a world flooded with noise, urgency, and expectation. And yet, your brain hasn't evolved fast enough to match it. The same neural circuitry that once fired in response to a stalking predator now activates when you see an unread message. The muscles that once prepared you to sprint from a threat now tense up when you anticipate an uncomfortable conversation. Your heart rate spikes, your stomach turns, your palms sweat, all without a single physical danger in sight. It's no wonder, then, that so many people feel on edge. They're not weak, they're overwhelmed by a mismatch between biology and context. Robert Sapolsky, who spent decades studying stress responses, explained that humans are unique in one disturbing way. We suffer in anticipation. We imagine loss and the body responds as if it's real. We predict disaster and cortisol floods our systems. Our stress isn't a momentary burst, it's a prolonged condition, one that erodes health, clarity, and resilience. This is not your fault, but it becomes your responsibility. You live in a world that monetizes your attention, manipulates your focus, and feeds on your uncertainty. To remain grounded within it requires more than resilience. It requires a new kind of awareness, an understanding that your nervous system needs care, not condemnation. Alan Watts spoke about surrendering to the flow of life. That doesn't mean giving in to chaos. It means recognizing that you are not a machine, that your reactions, even when inconvenient, are valid responses to an unnatural pace. So when you feel overwhelmed after scrolling for 5 minutes, that is not fragility. It is feedback. When your body resists a back-to-back schedule, it is not laziness. It is wisdom. Your brain is ancient, but your reality is not. Learning to live well within this contradiction is the beginning of healing, not fixing your reactions, but understanding their context. The problem is not just the stress, it's the shame layered on top of it. It's the narrative that says you should be able to handle everything, all the time. The truth is, you weren't made for this, and that doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. So the next time your body sounds the alarm, don't rush to silence it. Pause, trace it, ask what it's pointing to. Because often it's not fear, it's misplacement. It's your ancient system trying to survive in a world it never expected to meet. We often believe we live in an age of progress, of freedom, of self-expression. But beneath the polished surfaces, modern life is structured around control. Control over time, control over outcomes, control over emotions. This craving for stability infiltrates everything, from the schedules we keep to the ways we manage relationships, from the carefully crafted image we curate online to the goals we chase at all costs. But here's the hidden cost. When life is organized around control, unpredictability becomes intolerable. Alan Watts warned that our obsession with order is what creates disorder. The tighter we grip, the more everything slips. And beneath that slip is anxiety, not as a malfunction, but as the echo of a life that was never meant to be confined. Modern systems reward predictability. Schools train children to produce consistent answers. Workplaces demand uniform behavior. Even personal growth has become industrialized, measured in habits and routines. The result is a collective discomfort with spontaneity, with imperfection, with anything that cannot be forecasted. And so, we compensate. We plan excessively. We self-optimize. We monitor our moods and track our steps, all in a desperate effort to feel in charge of something that cannot be mastered, the unfolding of life. But existence was never meant to be orderly. The seasons don't ask for permission. Your breath doesn't follow a spreadsheet. Grief doesn't arrive by appointment. Neither does joy. When anxiety shows up, it might not be a sign of breakdown. It could be your body reminding you that your attempts to micromanage reality are wearing thin, that you are not a machine to be programmed, that feeling uncertain isn't failure. It's alignment with the unpredictable pulse of being alive. To live meaningfully is not to eliminate chaos, but to make room for it, to leave space for surprise, to trust that not everything needs to be handled, and that includes you. There is a moment in every life when the roles you've played begin to feel like costumes, when the praise you receive no longer satisfies, when the routines you once relied on feel foreign. This moment, while disorienting, is sacred because it marks the beginning of integration, the first signal that your inner self no longer wants to be hidden. We spend much of our lives performing for approval, for acceptance, for belonging. But in doing so, we fracture. A part of us lives outwardly, saying the right things, meeting expectations. Another part remains inside, unseen, waiting for permission to exist. Anxiety often arises at the border between these two selves, not because one is wrong and the other is right, but because the gap between them has become too wide to ignore. Alan Watts spoke of insecurity not as a condition to eliminate, but as evidence that we are alive. Pretending otherwise is what leads to collapse. When you uphold an identity that doesn't match your inner reality, your body reacts, not as punishment, but as protest. The dissonance between your public persona and private truth creates pressure, not immediately, but cumulatively. Over time, the weight of self-denial turns into fatigue, cynicism, and disconnection. You may find yourself exhausted not from what you do, but from who you have to be while doing it. That exhaustion is a message. It's the internal self-knocking. To bridge this divide, you don't need to reinvent yourself. You need to reintroduce yourself, to notice where you've been edited, to remember what you've buried for the sake of harmony. And then, gradually, you let more of that inner truth into the world. Not all at once, not for validation, but because the cost of hiding is too high. When you begin this process, anxiety may spike, not as a warning to retreat, but as confirmation that you are entering unfamiliar territory, that you are stepping toward congruence. And that step, however small, is the beginning of peace. Every discomfort you feel has a source, a reason, a history. But modern life teaches us to interrupt the signal before we understand what it's saying. We don't ask why we feel tension. We just want it gone. We want silence, not insight. But what if the anxiety you feel is not a disruption, but communication? Not something broken, but something speaking. That discomfort in your chest, the spiraling thoughts, the restlessness in your limbs, they are messages, not punishments. To notice without reacting is a form of intelligence. It allows you to separate what is felt from what is feared. In this space, something new can begin. Relationship. A relationship with yourself that is not based on avoidance or control. Alan Watts often spoke of surrender, not as defeat, but as union with what is. In this sense, surrender means hearing without resisting, feeling without rushing to escape. It is not giving up, it is tuning in. Observation is not passive, it is precise. It asks you to become a witness, to be present without commentary, to let your internal weather shift without the compulsion to name it as good or bad. And this witnessing is what begins to dissolve the cycle. Because anxiety feeds on your resistance. It grows in the soil of self-rejection. But when you lean in, gently, patiently, it finds no opposition to push against. The transformation is subtle. You begin to move through your day without being hijacked by every internal shift. You start to notice what precedes the spike in sensation. You realize some triggers have nothing to do with now. They are echoes, shadows, unfinished sentences in your nervous system, and slowly you become less governed by the storm and more attuned to its rhythm. You don't fight the weather anymore. You learn how to move with it. You take shelter when needed. You let the wind pass. To observe yourself without judgment is one of the most radical acts you can commit in a world that insists on constant improvement. It is the beginning of care that does not require correction, and that, in itself, is healing. Long before you could speak, your body knew. It knew when you were safe, when you were disconnected, when something wasn't right. That wisdom didn't disappear. It got buried beneath habits, obligations, screens, and noise. But it's still there, waiting. Anxiety often signals a disconnection from the body, not because the body is unwell, but because it's been ignored. The signals pile up until they break through. Fatigue, tightness, overthinking, panic. Robert Sapolsky reminds us that our stress response was designed to save us, not haunt us. But when it activates without release, without completion, it becomes something else. It turns inward. It wears us down. Returning to the body is not a luxury. It's the path back to balance. Not just through breathwork or movement, but through attention. Through re-inhabiting this form you carry. What does your back say when you sit? What does your neck whisper as you scroll? What does your breath do when you're pretending to be fine? These are not trivial questions. They are access points. The body does not speak in sentences. It speaks in pulses, aches, temperature, rhythm. It tells the truth long before the mind can interpret it. Alan Watts believed the present moment was not just a concept, but an embodied state. And the body is always here. It cannot time travel. It cannot fake presence. When you follow its cues, you land back in the only place healing ever happens, now. This return is not a one-time event. It is a daily reunion, a choice to descend from the storm of thought and anchor into sensation. It is choosing to trust what you feel over what you're told to feel, choosing to listen, not analyze. And over time, that listening becomes stability, not the kind built on rigidity, but the kind that flows. A nervous system that no longer sees every shift as a threat, a self that no longer flees discomfort. Because when the body leads, you remember what your thinking forgot, that you are not here to be efficient. You are here to be alive. And being alive means being in your body, fully. This is where anxiety softens, not because it's gone, but because it's no longer alone. It has been met, heard, felt, and that is all it ever asked for. Now you see it differently. Not as an enemy to conquer, not as a defect to erase, but as a mirror you've avoided for too long. Your anxiety was never against you. It was always trying to bring you back to yourself. The world taught you to fear discomfort, to hide unease behind goals, affirmations, and routines. But Alan Watts reminded us, you can only fall asleep by pretending the chaos isn't real. And when you finally stop pretending, the restlessness becomes meaningful. It becomes direction. You're not broken. You're responding to a world that rewards detachment, to a life that rarely makes space for stillness, to a body that remembers what your mind tries to forget. That being human means being sensitive, uncertain, open. So, no, you're not anxious. You're awake. And while awakening hurts, it is the first step back to something real. Not comfort, not control, but presence. And in that presence, life finally begins to feel like yours again.